I didn't cry the day my wife told me she wanted a divorce. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold, and I just nodded. Like she'd told me the weather was changing. Maybe that says something about where we were by then. My name is Arthur. Wait, no. Let me start where it actually matters. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working construction management, starting as a laborer in Cincinnati when I was 19, pouring concrete in the summer heat and learning every trade from the ground up. By the time I was 40, I was running projects, commercial builds, hospital wings, a few school renovations out in the suburbs. Not glamorous, not the kind of work that impresses people at dinner parties, but it was honest and it built something real. I built a house too, literally, 1,400 square feet on a half-acre lot in a quiet neighborhood outside Dayton, Ohio. I framed it myself on weekends over the course of 2 years. My wife at the time, I'll call her Diane, because that's her name, and she's earned whatever discomfort comes with being named. She said it was her dream home. She cried when we moved in. Happy tears, I thought. We had 2 kids. My son was 12 when we moved into that house. My daughter was 9. For a long time, things were good, or I told myself they were. The first crack I noticed, and I mean the first one I let myself see, was around the time I turned 56. Diane started mentioning a man from her yoga studio. She mentioned him casually, the way you mention weather. Patrick thinks the new coffee place on 5th is overrated. Patrick's daughter got into Ohio State. At first, I filed it away as nothing. Then I filed it away as something I didn't want to look at directly. The way you avoid a spot on the ceiling that might be water damage. Patrick was 44. He owned a chain of fitness studios across 3 states. He drove a car that cost more than I made in a year. He had a LinkedIn profile with a professional headshot and a headline that said, Entrepreneur, Wellness Advocate, Speaker. I had grease under my fingernails most days and a truck with 200,000 miles on it. I asked Diane once, maybe a year into the Patrick mentions, if everything was okay between us. She said yes. She said I was overthinking. She said I worked too much. 6 months after that conversation, she sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd had coffee 1,000 mornings, and told me she hadn't been happy in a long time, that she needed more, that she felt like she'd been living inside a life that was too small. I remember looking at the table while she talked. There was a coffee ring stain I'd been meaning to sand out and refinish. I never did get around to that. The divorce took 8 months. I won't lie and say I handled it with dignity every single day, because I didn't. There were nights I sat in my truck in the driveway of a motel off I-75 and talked out loud to nobody. There were mornings I showed up to job sites and couldn't remember driving there. But I did not fight dirty. I gave Diane the house I built with my hands, because my son still lived nearby, and I thought keeping things stable for him was more important than making a point. I took my tools, my truck, my retirement account, and a settlement that was fair on paper. I signed the papers in February. By March, I was renting a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex that smelled like somebody else's laundry. My son, who I'll call by what he always called himself around his friends, Beau, short for his middle name Beaumont, was 26 at the time. Old enough to know better. He'd always been closer to his mother, which I understood. What I didn't understand was how fast he pivoted. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Beau told me he'd had dinner with Patrick. He's a good man, Dad, he said on the phone. I remember standing at my kitchen counter, eating a sandwich I hadn't bothered to put on a plate. He makes Mom happy. He's accomplished. You might like him if you gave him a chance. I said, I'm sure he's fine, Beau. You sound like you're not fine. I'm eating a sandwich. There was a pause. Then he said, Mom said you've been talking to a lawyer about the property taxes from the last 2 years. You're not going to make this difficult, are you? That was the moment I understood something had shifted. He wasn't asking how I was. He was scouting. My daughter, she goes by her full name, Josephine, hates nicknames, called me that same night. She's 3 years younger than Beau and has always been the one who watches quietly and says less than she sees. She said, I heard you talk to Beau. He called me. He's been spending a lot of time over there, Dad. With Patrick. I know. I don't love it. You don't have to. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You doing okay?" And I said yes, which was about 40% true. "I need to tell you something about the property I own separately. Not the house, but a lot. About 12 acres outside of Wilmington, Ohio, that I'd purchased in my early 50s as an investment. My father had done the same thing when he was young, bought land he couldn't afford and held it, and it had eventually paid for his retirement. I'd been doing the same. The lot had a small cabin on it, nothing fancy, a wood stove, a well, propane. I used to go out there on weekends and work on things, fix fences, clear brush. Think. That property wasn't part of the divorce settlement. It was in my name only, purchased before we were married, documented clearly. Diane's lawyer looked at it. Then they let it go. That detail matters later. 8 months after the divorce, Diane and Patrick got engaged. I found out from Beau, who told me with the cautious energy of someone delivering news they expect to cause damage. I said that was fast. He said, "They're in love, Dad. It doesn't have a timeline." I said I hoped they'd be happy. I meant it more than he probably believed. What I didn't tell Beau was that I'd already begun making plans. Not revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I know how these stories go. And I'm not interested in being the kind of man who plots things in the dark. What I mean is, I'd been doing a lot of thinking about what I wanted the next chapter to look like. I'd started talking to a financial advisor named, well, she knows who she is, and she doesn't need her name in this story, who helped me understand what my retirement could look like if I made some moves in the next 2 years. The land in Wilmington had appreciated significantly. I had options. I decided to leave Ohio. I'd had a standing invitation from an old friend I'd worked with on a hotel project in the 90s, a man named Gil who'd retired to Asheville, North Carolina, and had been trying to get me to come down for 2 years. The mountains, seasons, but not brutal ones. A slower pace. I put in my notice at the company I'd been with for 11 years, finished out my last project, and in September I drove my truck south. I want to tell you I felt free. Some days I did. Other days I drove through the empty beauty of the Appalachian foothills and felt like a man who'd been subtracted from his own life. But I kept driving. Asheville suited me in ways I hadn't expected. I picked up occasional consulting work, reviewing project bids, doing site assessments for a small regional firm that didn't need me full-time but appreciated what I knew. I fixed up the cabin on the weekends I drove back to Wilmington. I joined a woodworking group that met Thursday nights in a guy's barn outside of town. Slow things, quiet things. I also eventually started a small Instagram account, Josephine's idea, not mine, where I posted pictures of the cabin renovations and the woodworking. Nothing fancy, just progress. I didn't think anyone would care. About 3,000 people started following it within 6 months. I don't fully understand why. But they did. Beau called me in November to tell me he was going to be Patrick's best man at the wedding. I was in the cabin when he called. I'd just finished installing a new section of porch railing, and I was sitting on the steps with a thermos of coffee, watching the light go sideways through the trees. It was one of those November afternoons in Ohio that looks like a painting someone couldn't quite finish. "I wanted to tell you myself," Beau said, "before you heard it somewhere else." I said, "I appreciate that. Are you okay?" "I'm sitting on a porch I just built, watching the sun go down. I'm fine." A pause. You're not going to say anything to Mom?" "What would I say?" "I don't know. Just, you're really okay with this?" I thought about that for a moment. "Beau," I said, "your mother is going to marry whoever she wants to marry. You're going to stand wherever you want to stand. That's not mine to be okay with or not." He said something about being glad I was being mature about it. I didn't say anything to that, because maturity had nothing to do with it. I just didn't have any more energy to spend on that particular fire. The wedding was in April. I was not invited, which was fine and expected. Josephine went because she said not going would have caused more drama than going, and she didn't want her mother's wedding day to be about her absence. She texted me that morning, "You doing okay?" I texted back, "Just put a new floor down in the back room. Looks good." She sent back a picture of herself in a blue dress looking like her grandmother. I didn't hear from Beau again until July. When I did, the call came at 6:47 in the morning. I was already up. I'm always up by 5:30 now, old habits from job sites, and I was drinking coffee on the porch in Asheville. I looked at the screen, let it ring twice. Then I picked up Dad. His voice had a texture to it I hadn't heard in years, rough at the edges, scraped. Bo, I'm sorry for calling so early. I was awake. A long pause. Patrick's in trouble. Financial trouble. Like, serious trouble. I set down my coffee. He explained it in pieces, the way you explain something you're still assembling in your own head. Patrick's fitness studio chain had been expanding too fast. He'd taken on investors he shouldn't have trusted and loans he couldn't service. 2 of the locations had already closed. There was a lawsuit from a former business partner. There were, Bo said, people he owed money to who were not the kind you get away with not paying. He didn't elaborate on that and I didn't press. How bad? I asked. Bad. He had to tell Mom last week. She didn't know any of it. I sat with that for a moment. The house, I said, not a question. Yeah, Bo said. The mortgage is behind. They got a notice. The house, my house, the one I'd framed with my own hands, the one Diane had cried happy tears over. What are you calling me for, Bo? Another long pause. Long enough that I heard birds starting up outside. Morning birds, the kind that don't know anything about any of this. Mom asked if I would call you. She thought maybe. She wanted to know if you might be willing to help. Like, financially. Maybe a bridge loan or something. Until things stabilize. I closed my eyes for a second. Here's what I did not say. I told you so. Here's what I did not say. You called me old and wore out and you stood next to that man and smiled while your mother walked toward him and now you're asking me to pay for it. Here's what I did not say. Do you remember the last time you told me to stop making things difficult? What I said was, Bo, I'm not in a position to do that. Dad, I'm not angry. I'm not punishing anyone. I genuinely don't have the kind of liquid cash you're describing, and even if I did, it wouldn't be appropriate. You have the land. In Wilmington. You could. No. The word came out quiet and flat and I didn't add anything to it. Bo was silent for a long moment. She's scared, Dad. I know she is. I'm sorry for that. I mean that sincerely. But this isn't something I can fix, and it's not something I should fix. She made her choices and so did Patrick and so did you, and I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it's true. He hung up, not angrily, just quietly, the way you hang up when you don't know what else there is to say. I sat there for a while with the phone in my hand. The birds were going full volume by then. I thought about a lot of things. I thought about the kitchen table with the coffee stain I never fixed. I thought about the way Diane looked in the early years, laughing at something on TV with her feet tucked under her on the couch. I thought about the frame of that house going up on a September Saturday in 2003, my son handing me nails because he was 8 years old and wanted to help. Then I poured the rest of my coffee off the side of the porch and went inside to start work. Josephine called me 2 days later. Not about the money. She'd already told me what was happening through a few texts, just factual updates, no pressure. She called to check on me. You sound tired, she said. I'm fine, Dad. You can just say it was hard. I leaned against the kitchen counter. Outside the window, the mountains were doing what they do in summer, which is just sit there being enormous and indifferent and somehow comforting. It was hard, I said. Not in the way you'd think. Not anger. Just. It's a strange thing to watch something you built fall apart and know there's nothing you're supposed to do about it. You don't have to do anything about it. I know. She's not your responsibility anymore. I know that too. Doesn't make it simple. Josephine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I've been thinking about coming to Asheville for a weekend. If that's okay, that's more than okay. I'll bring the kids. They've never seen the mountains. She has 2 kids. A boy who's 7 and a girl who just turned 4. They call me Grandpa Art. The 7-year-old is convinced I'm building some kind of castle up here, which is not entirely wrong as a description. She came the second weekend of August. I'd cleaned the apartment, which is not something I'm naturally inclined to do, and I'd stocked the refrigerator with things I thought a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old might want to eat. I was not entirely successful in this assessment, but we made it work. On Saturday, we drove out to the Blue Ridge Parkway and walked a trail that wasn't too long, but had a view that stopped you cold at the top. Josephine's son ran ahead the whole way and kept narrating things he saw. The little girl held my hand on the steeper parts. We didn't talk about Diane or Beau or Patrick. We didn't need to. That evening, after the kids were asleep, Josephine and I sat on the apartment balcony with beers and watched the city lights below. She said, "I'm proud of you, Dad. I don't know if I've said that recently, but I want to say it." "For what?" "For not falling into it. For not letting it pull you under. A lot of men would have." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. "You know Beau's been going through it," she said after a while. "I figured. He feels guilty. He won't say it, but I can see it. He's been quiet in a way he never is. He doesn't owe me an apology for choosing his mother's side. He knows what he said to you. About being... Joe called you just a construction worker at the rehearsal dinner. Someone told me. I hadn't known that detail. I took a sip of my beer and looked at the lights. He's going to have to live with the things he said, I told her. That's his work to do, not mine." She nodded. We sat in quiet for a while. The kind of quiet that's actually comfortable, that only works with people you've known long enough. "How's the cabin coming?" she asked. "Almost done. The back deck just needs a railing. I've got the wood cut. You gonna stay here in Asheville?" I thought about it genuinely before answering. "For now, maybe longer. I like it here. I like the pace of it." "You met anyone?" I looked at her sideways. She kept her face completely neutral, which she's always been good at. "There's a woman in the woodworking group," I said. "She teaches high school history. We've had coffee a few times." Josephine's face broke into the first real smile I'd seen from her all weekend. "Dad, don't make a thing of it." "I'm not making a thing of it. I'm just..." She laughed. "Good. I'm just glad." Her name is Vivienne, not from the list, not from any story on the channel, just a woman in her late 50s who lost her husband 4 years ago and has the kind of patience and stillness that you don't often find in people and can't manufacture. She makes furniture on the weekends. She knew who William Tecumseh Sherman was off the top of her head, which is not a low bar for me. We've been seeing each other for about 3 months now. Nothing dramatic. Coffee, walks, dinner sometimes. She came to see the cabin in Wilmington last month and walked around it without saying much, and then stood at the edge of the back field where you can see the hills roll out and said, "You made something real here." I said, "Yeah, I did." Beau called in October. I almost didn't pick up. I was in the middle of routing a joint on a piece of walnut for a side table I was making for Josephine's birthday. I set down the router, dusted my hands on my jeans and picked up. "Dad, hey, He stopped, started again. "I've been trying to figure out how to make this call for a while." Take your time." I said things. I've said things over the past couple years that were wrong, that were unfair, and I don't have an excuse for it. I know I don't. I sat down on the workbench stool. "I think I got caught up in wanting to believe what I wanted to believe," he said. "About Patrick, about what that was going to mean for Mom. And I took it out on you in ways I shouldn't have." "You did," I said, not harshly, just accurately. "I'm sorry, Dad." I looked at the piece of walnut on the bench. The grain in it was something else, deep and varied, the kind you can only see when you cut into the wood and sand it back. You can't tell what's in something until you open it up. "I accept your apology," I told him. "And I want you to know I don't hold the anger anymore. But I also want you to understand that what you said, to me, and apparently about me, that changes things. Not forever, but it takes time to come back from. I know. We're not going to pretend it didn't happen. No. I know, but I'm not turning away from you either. You're my son. That doesn't have an off switch." He was quiet for a long time, and I think he was trying not to cry and not quite succeeding. We talked for another hour, about small things mostly. His job, he works in logistics, been there for 4 years, an apartment he was thinking about moving into, a trip he'd been considering, maybe out west somewhere. He asked about Asheville. I told him about the woodworking group, about the mountains, about the cabin. He asked if he could come see it sometime. "Yeah," I said, "come see it, before the holidays." Before the holidays. After we hung up, I sat in the workshop for a while without doing anything. Just sat. The wood waiting on the bench, the tools hanging on the wall, the smell of sawdust and linseed oil that I've had in my nose since I was a teenager. There's something people don't understand about the kind of work I've done my whole life. The kind that leaves marks on your hands and dust on your clothes. They think it's diminished somehow. They see a man who works with his hands and they calculate what that means about what his life is worth. What I know is this. Everything that lasts was built by someone. Every house, every bridge, every table and staircase and porch rail. Someone stood somewhere with tools and knowledge and patience, made something out of nothing. That's not a lesser thing. That's not a life that was too small. I know that now in a way I didn't used to, or maybe I always knew it and just needed someone to take it away from me before I understood that I'd had it all along. Vivienne is coming to Thanksgiving this year. Josephine's idea. She called Vivienne directly, which is exactly the kind of thing Josephine does, and apparently they talked for 45 minutes and are now something like friends. Beau is coming too. First time I'll have both kids in the same place in 2 years. We're going to eat at the cabin in Wilmington. I finished the back deck railing last week. It's solid. You could lean your whole weight against it and it wouldn't move. That's how I build things. That's always been how I build things.